This is the second of our great debates, so of course that means it's now a tradition of the Uniting Church, which cannot, under any circumstances, ever be changed. Even the remotest hint of the merest suggestion that anything about this debate format might at some hypothetical point in the future be open to the idea of the brief conversation about change is now anathema. This is it. We will do this now until hell freezes over. Last year, this time, we debated the proposition that the Uniting Church in South Australia should divest itself of all its properties. The outcome of the debate was a real conversation about what that could mean for us in our Presbytery and indeed in the Uniting Church in South Australia. So I'm hoping that this one will do the same. This debate is about something so fundamental to our way of being church that many of us might not have even thought about questioning it. That is Sunday morning worship services. So committed are we to meeting on a Sunday morning that some of us can't imagine the church, what it might look like if we didn't meet at either 9:30, 10 o'clock, 10:30 or 11 o'clock and sit in rows and do what we always do. But don't worry, we have two teams of very interesting, erudite, witty and extremely good-looking, of course, thought leaders to help us explore the proposition that the Uniting Church in South Australia should abandon Sunday morning worship services. In the debate, the affirmative team will tell us why we should abandon Sunday morning and stay home and read the paper instead. The negative team will seek to convince us of the value and importance of continuing Sunday morning worship gatherings. Of course, as in any formal debate, the arguments advanced by each person may or may not be their own. So don't attack them later if they hold it. We have asked each member of our team to make the best arguments they can for the position that they've been asked to take. This is the rules. Each member of each team will have 4 minutes in which to make their argument and rebut the arguments of their opponents. Each speaker will hear this bell at 3 minutes and 30 seconds and again at 4 minutes.
We might need some more volume. I could barely hear that. Yeah, you need to
Well, I could make it ruder than that, but...
I'll do.
When the final speaker for the negative team has spoken, both teams will then have 5 minutes to confer on what closing arguments they will make and who among them will make those arguments. No new information is allowed to be introduced during the closing arguments. That's how formal debates work. Both teams will then have 4 minutes to make closing arguments. And we're asking you to hear all the arguments with an open mind and a good heart. And may the best argument win. Are you the opening speaker for the positive team?
I am. Yes.
Please.
Do you need to, set a timer for me? Maybe I could start talking before. All right, I won't then. Okay. Have you ever walked into a church on Sunday morning and wondered where all the people are? You might be remembering years gone by when pews were packed. You might be feeling sad that there are few younger people in church. So where are they? We've got a few suggestions. Stand up, jog on your stop.
Walking the dog, having my coffee.
And I have one too. Well, except I can't get it off. There we go. Okay. Put Teddy there. Okay, time to ticking. We're here to discuss with you why the Uniting Church in South Australia should abandon Sunday morning worship services. You may have a reaction to this. I'm sure some of you want to yell at me for even suggesting it. Others may applaud the new and radical idea. Diane, Simon and I are here to explain to you why it's such a good idea and hopefully give you some new thoughts on it. Those of us who are in church on a Sunday morning often wonder where the people are, because it doesn't appear they're with us. Well, the truth is, they might be walking the dog, going for a run, eating brunch, enjoying the beach, the great outdoors. They may be at work. They may be playing sport, or maybe they're sleeping. I think if you ask any of us, we connect with God in very real ways when we do these things. And we can also connect with others while we're doing those things too. Importantly, I should say that we do love meeting as a church family. It's wonderful to come together and worship our God and meet with our church family, but why does it have to be a Sunday morning? Why? When there are so many wonderful things to be doing on a Sunday. It's a great time to be out and about. Most importantly, it's when our community is out and about. And we need to remember those that have to be at work. Over the years, our Sundays have filled up. When Sunday services were at their peak, there really wasn't anything else to do on a Sunday. Now it's different. We as the church talk about being where the people are. We talk about forming relationships with those outside the church, yet we are hiding in our old, cold, uncomfortable buildings on a Sunday morning. Let's be honest, guys, pews aren't comfortable, are they? And you know, the coffee's not always the best in your church. We talk about connecting with others, yet we're cloistered away when society is out and about. People don't walk into churches anymore. That was an era that has long gone. I think most of us would agree that we need to get to where the people are. There are many new and real ways to meet people. Yes, we want to keep meeting together for worship, but seriously, that could be at another time. Maybe we could get together with other churches around us and agree on a different time each. How fabulous would the chance of a worship service every day of the week be, not just Sunday? So how do we as the church keep relevant with society when society doesn't see Sunday as a sacred day anymore? It doesn't mean people don't want to connect with God, but maybe they want choices, and maybe it's our time to change and give a new choice. Thank you. Dressing gown.
Looks like it's me. That's me. I haven't got the gift of the gab like these guys, so bear with me. Abandoning Sunday worship. Our opposition has tried their best to sway us, but I'm not sure these arguments will hold. Trevor, Craig and I are going to share another idea, another view. Some of you actually don't know me, but I have 3 boys, 8, 5 and 1, and something I've observed in them is that they need life to be black and white, right and wrong, this is okay and this isn't okay, he got a bigger piece of pie, mine is smaller, it's not right. Some would even call it absolute, they need that. Now I'm not calling our opposition children, but if the shoe fits. Now children don't stay in absolutes, we know that. They learn to be flexible, negotiate and live in the grey, like we all do. Now us grown-ups on this side know that we need flexible thinking to recognise that we can't abandon Sunday worship altogether. Hear, hear. And our opposition knows it. We feel for them, we really do. They have a challenge ahead of them in this debate. In fact, we all know that the early church met on a Sunday, and we too mark this with importance and identity with the Christian faith. This long-term loyalty to Sunday worship is integral, which Trevor will share some more. Now, this is not only a theological debate. We'll hear from Craig that this is also very practical. Now, with my 3 boys, 2 of them who go to school, our days fill up very fast. They play hard and they crash in the evening. Our family could not manage a midweek service. I struggle to extricate myself out of the house to get along to the women's group we have once a fortnight. And Saturdays are, of course, full of sports and birthdays and family time. But of course that leaves Sunday, the day of rest. If it fits us, and it also fits our understanding in our society that that's what happens on a Sunday. It is, it just is, it's a tradition. But flexible thinking is important. We're not saying the other days of the week are less worthy of our time, and they could work for a lot of people. But to abandon altogether Sunday worship would be sending a really confusing message to our community. So, we need a day to set apart and hear from God in our community with one another, and that day is Sunday. Over to you, Trevor. Oh, no, it's not. It's over to you, Simon. Sorry, I thought we were in order when I wrote this.
Now, before you start throwing tomatoes at us or screaming blasphemy, let's start with the Bible as a key source of wisdom to find a way forward here. Anne has reminded us that we're in a new era as a church, and as such, we need to adapt accordingly, sometimes leaving behind the things we have always done for a courageous new future. Jesus has given us as individuals and as gathered as the church, two greats to fulfill: the greatest commandments and the Great Commission. But how are we to love our neighbour or to go and make disciples if we never are in community with them or have the opportunity for relationship with them? The writer of Hebrews warns us in chapter 10 not to forsake meeting together and encouraging one another in the faith. But this isn't up for debate. This is one of the core purposes of the church as we understand it. We've always been created to observe a Sabbath, a day of rest in our cycle of our life. In Exodus 20, Jesus instructs the people, "Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labour and do all your work, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath and the day of the Lord." God has always intended our week to include a rest day that focuses on God, and we affirm this. But according to Scripture, the Sabbath isn't Sunday in the first place. According to Luke 23, Jesus died on the preparation day, which we now call Good Friday. The next day was the Sabbath, as the women rested. And on the Sunday morning, as they gathered at the grave to prepare Jesus' body, they celebrated and discovered Jesus risen. So our Sunday rest and our godly focus time slot isn't even biblical. Of course, the ministers and pastors in the room know that Sunday isn't a Sabbath anyway. It's a work day. For me, my Sabbath begins on Sunday afternoon and continues through to Monday morning. And it is only because some churches have been willing to take the bold step of moving away from the Sunday morning time slot that I can then partake in a worship service myself on Sunday afternoon during my Sabbath. Paragraph 3 of the Basis of Union describes us as a pilgrim people, always on the way towards a promised goal. The only way that we remain a pilgrim people is if we change and adapt as the missional needs around us change. And in paragraph 11, we commit to sharpening our understanding of the will and purpose of God by contact with contemporary thought, as well as being ready on occasion demands to confess the Lord in fresh words, deeds, and time slots. Okay, I added that bit, but it's true. The local church is the primary centre for fellowship and worship, and the chief means of God uses for evangelism, discipleship making, and ministry. The New Testament letters and teachers provide us plenty of support and wisdom here as to how to do this, how to be the church, but never on what time slot we should assume. And we all know what happens when you assume. Thank you.
You have to imagine me as Jeff Hurst. I've got the right body shape and the right hair colour. The raspy voice. As my somewhat learned colleague pointed to, Sunday was the day of resurrection. One of the corner foundational stones of our very worshipping practices, recognising the resurrection. Jesus called his followers to gather regularly to worship. And they chose Sunday because it was the day of resurrection. It's also the first day of the week, so in recognising Sunday as the day of worship gives over the whole week in worship, recognising that it is the most important aspect of our daily lives. Sunday is also the day of Pentecost, which came to have new and significant meaning for many of its first followers. It's traditionally identified as the first day of creation. And while most of the followers were Jews and they set their date aside for observance, I'm reading the notes wrong. Most of the original Christians, as they developed their faith, were also stepped into the Jewish traditions. One might also use the phrase trapped in their other traditions. Just as in some ways our society becomes trapped in its traditions of sports and gym classes and coffee. Not that many of you are trapped into coffee, I'm sure. So the first disciples moved their day to Sunday so that it didn't clash with all the things that were happening around them. Very early in history, in Acts 27a, on the first day of the week, when we met to break bread, Paul was holding a discussion with them. Luke records that from very early on, they had gathered on a Sunday, and so Sunday forms one of the very cores of a long and rich tradition of worship. Sunday worship is a statement to the community around us, a statement to our society that says we are not caught up in the meaningless and the trivial of life, but we set aside and set apart a day of worship. And we do it on the Sunday. It is tied to those markers of our faith, to the resurrection, to the Pentecost, to the beginning of all time in creation. And so for that reason, we hold Sunday to be the time of sacred worship in our community. Thank you.
Yeah. I better get the lead. And I don't drink coffee, it is actually green tea, but that's okay. It works for the purposes. Now, as I do have the occasional opportunity to walk my dog at the beach on a Sunday morning, I do often pause and wonder, what would it be like if the church were here amongst the people? Because there are a heck of a lot of people on Henley Beach on a Sunday morning walking their dogs. And we're not just tucked away in our church, and by which I mean our buildings. We engage in conversation with others. There are very definitely relationships built up between the dog walkers and their four-legged friends. We celebrate the beauty of creation, whatever the weather. Let's be where the people are. Let's go rather than just sit and hope. And is Sunday really the first day of the week? For me, it's probably Monday, to be honest. And where do we sit with where are two or three gathered in my name? Does that say gathered in my name on a Sunday morning? And are we trapped in the traditions of our Sunday morning? Good questions. And yes, we all have full diaries. Thank you, Amy. You know, my kids are older, but the diary's still full. And but it's full for society as well. They don't carve out Sunday mornings. And does society really understand that Sunday is the day for worship? I don't think so anymore. And practically, it's also incredibly difficult for many of our aged or infirm to get to Sunday morning services. I see that week in and week out here in this place. Getting going in the morning can be hard work, particularly if you're relying on carers or someone else to get you ready in a timely manner. And midweek, mid-afternoon services are often a great option in these circumstances. My husband, he's a shift worker too. I can't remember the last time we saw him on a Sunday morning. It's difficult for him and others like him to get to worship when it's just set in those couple of hours on a Sunday. And we also need to consider what constitutes church. Are not our other weekly gatherings like playgroup or our drop-in or emergency relief centres or op shops church to a large extent? People are gathering, relationships are being built. The good news of Jesus is being shared practically and in conversation. And these things are often based around a heart of hospitality, a perfect way to engage together and much more enjoyable. Speaking of hospitality, has the time not come for the church to gather more around table fellowship? These opportunities to eat and drink together, to have meaningful conversation, reading and learning from the Bible together, rather than sitting in what is essentially a large lecture hall, having the professionals speak at you. Learning is changing in our society, yet the church can be a bit behind the eight ball. And I've just lost my place. No, let's be creative and have meals together, and not just Sunday morning breakfast or morning tea. Our Sunday morning number are generally dwindling, and so is our offering accordingly. Are we being wise stewards of our building resources by only often being open on a Sunday? All right, I'll go to my last paragraph then. Look, it could be easy to say that we could all do with the extra sleep in on a Sunday morning, or brunch at the local cafe, that walk on the beach, that run, that time with family, things I jealously watch others do. But abandoning Sunday morning worship is more than that. It's about going, about being with the people, it's about flexibility, it's about being missional, it's about being creative. It's about being a pilgrim people.
Well, firstly, well, firstly, I want to affirm the most insightful and valued comments of my esteemed colleagues here, and therefore recognise the resorting to props in the absence of any real substance of argument. But I do want to acknowledge the attempt that has been made, and recognise that there has been a key point missed by the people who seek to find some rationale of this question of abandoning Sundays, and it's the word abandon, and they have not addressed. And in that regard, what are they proposing that we abandon? I mean, for example, they talk about we cannot no longer connect with God, and I'm thinking the people that I meet with on a Sunday morning would take some offence at the notion that they are no longer connecting with God because they choose to move and gather and express their faith. And the language of old and cold, my goodness. I must say, I am minister of the Lefevre Uniting Church, who are, I think, Cheryl, we can acknowledge we're an ageing congregation, but they are missionally vibrant as well in what they are doing. And so the practicalities of what it would mean for them to, in the midst of the flurry of the work they're doing in the community week by week, to pause on a Sunday morning, which has been the tradition, which is what is familiar, which is sound, it's planned, it's constant. They know where they can gather and be affirmed and refreshed. Now, this notion that, Sunday is no longer sacred, my goodness, who would dare suggest? I have a very dear relationship of a person who does not attend Sunday mornings, but on the notion of this question, she was gobsmacked that Sunday is in fact still recognised as the go-to day on a Sunday if you are looking to go and worship. So if you're out in the community and you were wondering if I'm looking for some spiritual space, I know traditionally that I can find a church that will be there on a Sunday morning. That's practical, that's reliable, that's constant, and that's considered. So, a new era, Simon? Really? So, what about the past era? What about the era of those people who have served us as the backbone of the church? This is their solace. This is their place. And yet, in the midst, we're asking to abandon what is constant, stable and refreshing for our older congregations. I'm sorry, Simon, I'm just catching my breath on that. Oh.
You can keep breathing if you like.
And Diane, apparently we're trapped. Is that right? We're trapped? Is that what we're trapped in tradition in a society that no longer relates to this particular gathering? However, I want to affirm that there are those who have served our community, our faith community, for many, many years, who have been the backbone of the church for decades. Those who know how to organise their transport, get people, they will be ready. They will be up on a Sunday morning because of their commitment to this particular church, this particular faith, this particular mission. And so therefore, I seek to affirm those people pastorally that we must be considering as well in the life of the church, in our local congregations, and more broadly for the Uniting Church in SA.
Friends, if you'd like to talk amongst yourselves, we've got 5 minutes for these teams to get together, come up with their killer points, and decide how they're going to deliver it. So 5 minutes.
Well, so one.
Preparation time is up, and both the affirmative and the negative team have 4 minutes to address us and to finally convince us to their position. So the affirmative team, have at it, 4 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, practitioners and practical thinkers, we are entering a new era. There's no doubting that. This era will require us to make regular, courageous change in our places of worship. COVID acquainted us all too well with change. But there is no stopping now if we want to be a thriving church of the future, not a dead one. So today, as new and courageous ideas have been presented to you, stepping beyond the default of Sunday morning worship, you have your first and very natural reaction may be shock, fear, and anxiety. But as you have lunch in a moment, discussing and pondering our debate, or as you lay awake tonight and your thoughts settle from the day, I wonder if shock and fear might transition into questions. Not immediate action, but important questions like, what if? What if our service time slot wasn't as rigid? What possibilities could this open up? Our somewhat learned colleagues over here have presented a range of reasons you should stay as you are, rigid and fixed in your ways. But change is inevitable. And in fact, if we don't choose to change, choose to govern and direct our future, we will end up facing changes in ways we didn't choose and didn't want. Many of the reasons for Sunday morning worship that have been presented seek to keep you comfortable, forgetting your pilgrim identity. We must remain a people on the move. For instance, we do not seek to abandon worship, but to offer more options for people to connect in meaningful ways. Craig mentioned that the oldies have a strong commitment to the morning time slot. I'm wondering if Craig will be available this coming Sunday to dress Diane's oldies and assist them with meeting the Sunday morning deadline. To stick with such rigidity of Sunday mornings ignores the reality that is before us. Fewer and fewer people hold Sunday as a sacred day. Surely every day is a sacred opportunity to worship God. As a child, like I was called previously, growing up in a modern society, a child needs to develop their own ability to govern themselves. There are all kinds of things wrestling for priorities. They may well benefit from clear discipline at home, but in the world, they need the freedom to choose when they worship as they grow, to make a personal commitment, not just to follow the status quo of their parents. All of this has been put before you as a fear tactic for change. But as Amel shared with us this morning, we do not need to fear. Jesus Christ is our cornerstone, and we have the privilege of working in partnership with Jesus in our individual churches and context. 2 Timothy 1 reminds us, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. To live out this identity, we must be willing to ask the tough questions of this new era. Like our Jensek pointed out, for too long we have opted for keeping the peace in some of our conversations rather than the questions and the change. While Philip may well have been talking about buildings, the time and form of our meetings requires bold and courageous action too. Are we missionally vibrant, joyful and thriving communities of faith? We believe a key question of this area as part of a wider set of ponderings is, does the Sunday morning time slot assist you and your congregation to best fulfill your missional call? Will you be bold enough to ask that question?
Well, I guess it's worth acknowledging to hear Simon's acknowledgement that they don't want to abandon Sunday. Was that what I heard you say, Simon, that you said you don't want to abandon? Because as I see the question before us, that is the key word in this statement. It is that they want to abandon. And when it comes to matters of flexibility versus matters of rigidity, that has not been our argument for a moment. We very much believe in flexibility. We very much believe in adaptability. We have put our case quite clearly about the challenges of modern society and what that means. We just want to point out that Sunday morning does still have a place. It's not to be something to be shunned or disrespected or disregarded. We simply want to say we don't want to abandon it. Let's look at some other options though. We can still be distinctive on a Sunday morning. We don't have to meet in a building on a Sunday morning. We can actually gather down the beach, walking our dogs on a Sunday morning if we choose. We can actually be in the community whether we're in a building or not in a building. But we simply don't want to say, let's abandon this, which has its significant place in the life of the church. Let's not forget our theological, spiritual roots. It was in the vibrancy of life at the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ that was the pivotal point at which this has significance of when we should meet. This is a focal point. And I hear the arguments about Sabbath and how that has shifted, and I don't challenge that, Simon, for a moment. But we are in a new era. You're right. We're in a new era of resurrection. And what a wonderful reminder that is to meet on a Sunday morning, that this is Resurrection Day. This is the day that matters. This is the day when faith communities take time out from what I might say very vibrant missional activity during the week. And I want to refer back to the church at Lefevre, as I know, I'm sure your church is too, Simon. Active throughout the week, busy lives we live. But what about that designated space where we can draw aside, whatever age we may be, to still preserve that Sunday morning space? Transport can be arranged for the elderly. People can still set aside their time as families. But do we want to abandon that? We are saying no more Sunday mornings. That's the argument you're putting. Can I just clarify that? You are saying to us that there are no more Sunday morning. No, this has been the original point. This has been the original point, where they have not addressed it throughout the argument. The question clearly puts, can I read this back to you? The Uniting Church in South Australia should abandon Sunday morning worship services. This is what, so you did... So we rest our case. And we leave the wise and consensus-driven people of this movement to make a decision. Thank you.
Yes, please thank our 6 panellists, debaters. You heard appeals to tradition, you heard appeals to scripture, you heard appeals to common sense, tiny bit of abuse, but you know, you can't have everything. I was completely astonished that I had to use the buzzer so rarely that people came in under time. May it be so tomorrow morning in your worship services. We're not going to decide who won and who didn't, because this is an ongoing conversation, and hopefully it's raised a whole bunch of things for you to think about and talk about over lunch. So thank you for participating, and thank you guys very much for doing all the hard work.